Near midnight on May 27, pale Arctic daylight hangs over Rambakken while your battalion waits to cross toward Narvik. Cold spray blows over the boats, mixing with smoke and the metallic smell of ammunition. Sergeant Olav Nielsen crouches beside you and checks that everyone understands the route once ashore. Private Eirik Halvorsen whispers that the town has waited 7 weeks for this morning. Corporal Johan Lund, your medic, tightens his satchel and watches the pale shoreline beneath the midnight sun. Then the signal comes. Engines rise and your boat pushes into water streaked by distant gunfire. You are finally moving toward Narvik, the town Germany seized on the morning of April 9th. 7 weeks earlier, you were sleeping at Settermoon when a runner hammered on the barracks door. You are 25, a private in Battalion 2 of Infantry Regiment 15, part of Norway's 6th Division. Your battalion has recently served on neutrality duty and already knows its equipment better than many mobilizing units. Europe is at war. But until this morning, Norway has remained neutral despite the conflict around it. Narvik matters because Swedish iron ore reaches its ice-free harbor by rail before continuing overseas. Even ordinary soldiers understand that iron becomes steel, and steel keeps modern armies fighting. The runner says German forces are attacking Norwegian ports, and Narvik is already in immediate danger. Reports soon say 10 German destroyers entered Ofotfjord shortly after 3 in the morning. The coastal defense ships Eidsvold and Norge were waiting near Narvik when the destroyers approached through snow. Eidsvold rejected a demand to surrender and was torpedoed before she could fire a single shot. Later reports would show that 175 of Eidsvold's 183 crewmen were killed in the sinking. Norge opened fire in the harbor before German torpedoes struck and sank her during the short fight. More than 100 men aboard Norge were killed, while 90 survived the destruction of the ship. You witnessed none of this directly. The story reaches Settermoen through broken calls, runners, and anxious officers. German mountain troops have landed from the destroyers and are moving to secure Narvik and surrounding positions. Colonel Konrad Sunlo surrenders Narvik without a land battle, despite orders from General Fleischer to resist. About 200 Norwegian soldiers slip eastward from the occupied town along the railway toward Bjornfjell. German troops also seize Elvegårdsmoen, capturing stores that Norway badly needs for mobilization. Every new report sounds worse, but Sergeant Nilsen warns that rumors are arriving faster than verified orders. Your battalion is immediately placed on a war footing as the 6th Division mobilizes across northern Norway. Officers distribute ammunition, maps, winter equipment, and assignments while cooks keep coffee moving between crowded rooms. Eric jokes that Germany might have chosen a warmer country if it wanted an easy invasion. Nobody laughs very loudly, because the map already shows how close the enemy has landed. Your battalion does not rush blindly toward occupied Narvik. It prepares to block German expansion farther north. Trucks and marching columns begin moving through valleys where snow still lies deep beside thawing roads. The mountains look familiar, yet every bridge and bend now feels like a possible military objective. Johan checks feet, hands, and packs because cold injuries can remove soldiers before bullets ever reach them. Sergeant Nilsen repeats that surviving the march is part of fighting the campaign. Nobody knows whether the next order will send you toward Grottingen, Bardu, or another threatened road. On April 10, news arrives that British destroyers entered Ofotfjord and attacked the German naval force. 5 Royal Navy destroyers struck the anchorage at Narvik in the first major British counterattack there. 2 German destroyers were sunk and several others damaged during the violent fight inside the fjord. The British also lost Hunter and Hardy, while several surviving destroyers left with serious damage. The result is not a clean victory, but it proves the German destroyer force can be attacked. You hear the naval news from a messenger, not from some perfect viewpoint above the fjord. That distinction matters because most of your war arrives as fragments long before it becomes history. Meanwhile, German mountain troops push outward from Bjørkvik and other captured positions around Narvik. On April 12, fighting breaks out near the Grottingen tourist station north of the German bridgehead. Norwegian forces there are forced back first toward Lapphaugen and then farther toward Fossbakken. Your battalion moves toward the threatened sector as roads fill with troops, sledges, vehicles, and scattered civilians. Nobody sees a single continuous front because valleys, ridges, snowstorms, and fjords divide everything into separate struggles. Adults from exposed farms carry blankets and sacks while soldiers pass in the opposite direction. Eric says the road itself seems unable to decide which way survival lies. By then, German aircraft are searching roads and valleys whenever weather allows them to fly. You learn to distrust open ground even when the sky appears empty. Artillery echoes between mountains until one explosion seems to arrive from 3 directions. Sergeant Nilsson says echoes are not intelligence, so everyone keeps watching the actual terrain. Johan treats a soldier whose ankle twisted badly while jumping from a truck on an icy road. The injury looks embarrassingly ordinary beside invasion, yet it removes one rifle from the column. On April 13, Norwegian forces stopped the German advance near Jordbrua between Lapphaugen and Fossbakken. The stand prevents the German mountain troops from simply rolling farther north through the sector. That same day, another much larger Royal Navy force enters Ofotfjord to finish the naval battle. The battleship Warspite and accompanying destroyers attack the remaining German destroyers around Narvik. By the end of the action, the remaining German destroyers are destroyed or deliberately scuttled. British naval superiority now isolates the German land force from normal reinforcement by sea. Isolation sounds comforting, until someone reminds you thousands of armed Germans are still on Norwegian ground. Surviving German sailors reach shore and are organized into units that strengthen the land defenses. Over the coming weeks, aircraft, parachute drops, and rail traffic through Sweden will still bring supplies and reinforcements. Your officers therefore treat the naval victory as an advantage, not as the end of the campaign. That evening, your battalion digs positions while wind drives loose snow across the shallow trenches. Eric tries to warm his hands around a metal cup and immediately regrets touching it. Johan wraps a man's frost-damaged fingers while explaining that numbness is not the same as strength. Sergeant Nilsson studies a map marked with roads, lakes, ridges, and reports already becoming outdated. You realize Narvik is not one battle, but a chain of problems spread across an enormous landscape. The Germans hold the town and several nearby positions, while Norwegian forces gather strength farther north. The sea increasingly favors the Allies, but German aircraft can still punish exposed movement on land. Every advantage seems to arrive attached to another problem. During your first nights near the front, sleep comes in short pieces, interrupted by sentry changes. Rifles must be kept dry, boots must be checked, and ammunition cannot be wasted on shadows. Eric claims the snow is the only thing in Norway that has successfully surrounded everyone. Sergeant Nilsson tells him to complain more quietly so the snow does not hear him. The joke passes through the trench and disappears into the wind almost immediately. The next morning brings patrols rather than a dramatic charge toward Narvik. Your squad studies tracks, listens for engines, and checks routes that German troops might use. Sometimes fresh footprints end at bare rock where wind has erased everything useful. Sometimes distant gunfire means another unit is fighting in a valley you cannot even see. Johan says the mountains make every company feel like the only army left in Norway. Yet couriers keep arriving, proving the 6th Division is building a wider defense across the region. General Carl Gustav Fleischer has ordered full mobilization in northern Norway and intends to keep fighting. That knowledge steadies men who have heard how quickly other Norwegian cities were seized. Your battalion has an advantage many units elsewhere lack: recent field service and familiar equipment. Even so, nobody pretends training has prepared you for German aircraft. You spend hours improving positions with tools that strike frozen earth like iron. Snow walls offer concealment, but their brightness can also expose every moving figure to distant eyes. Food arrives irregularly, and warm meals become dependent on roads that aircraft can interrupt. Coffee remains reliable only because soldiers will apparently reorganize civilization to obtain it. After several days, your uniform smells of smoke, damp wool, leather, and unwashed exhaustion. Eric stops joking about April feeling like January because nobody needs the comparison anymore. Johan keeps counting bandages, while officers keep counting ammunition and available men. Sergeant Nilsson keeps counting hours until the next order changes everything again. You begin understanding why commanders care so much about Lapphaugen, Gratangen, and the roads between them. Control of each pass can open or close movement through terrain where alternatives barely exist. German forces dig into positions that use steep slopes and narrow approaches to multiply their strength. Norwegian patrols probe those positions carefully, trying to learn more without paying unnecessary casualties. Your first exchange of fire comes at long range, across broken ground near the contested approaches. The shots are brief, scattered, and far less cinematic than the fear they create. You see flashes near rocks, return controlled fire, and move only when Sergeant Nilsson orders it. No enemy line suddenly appears for you to defeat before sunset. Instead, both sides disappear behind terrain, weather, and distance after several tense minutes. Johan checks everyone afterward and seems almost disappointed that his medical bag remains closed. Eric tells him disappointment is unhealthy for a medic, which finally earns a tired smile. The small encounter teaches you how quickly a peaceful slope can become a firing position. It also teaches you that surviving contact does not mean you understood everything that happened. By mid-April, the campaign has settled into preparation, probing attacks, and constant movement through mountain weather. British troops land at Harstad and Sjøvegen on April 14 to support the Norwegian campaign. French and Polish formations will arrive between late April and early May as Allied strength grows. You do not know how large that help will become or whether it will arrive fast enough. For now, your war remains snow ridges, German positions, and orders issued one valley at a time. The invasion that seized Narvik in hours is becoming a campaign measured in weeks. The next days settle into a pattern too harsh to become routine. You dig firing positions into frozen ground and sleep in bursts between snow, wind, and sentry duty. Rations taste of tin and cold fat, and coffee becomes more valuable than most speeches. Every path through the hills feels exposed, even when no aircraft appear overhead. Letters from home stop sounding ordinary once every valley can suddenly become a front. You watch German planes search valleys and roads, reminding everyone that the sky now belongs elsewhere. Yet the ground remains Norwegian in a way maps alone cannot describe. Local guides, reservists, and regular soldiers begin shaping defense through knowledge of snow slope and distance. You learn how quickly weather can erase movement and how easily mountain echoes can confuse direction. You also learn that exhaustion makes every rumor sound official. On April 24, Norway's 6th Division begins an offensive against German-held positions across the Narvik sector. Fighting around Lapphaugen and Gratangen is slowed by snowstorms, exhaustion, strong positions, and difficult terrain. The offensive does not produce an easy breakthrough, but Norwegian pressure on the German perimeter keeps growing. On April 25, another Norwegian battalion suffers severe losses after German forces counterattack in Gratangen. News of those losses kills any fantasy that mountain knowledge alone can guarantee survival. Your squad spends the next week probing ridges, guarding routes, and avoiding needless losses. Small contacts flare and vanish among rocks, sparse trees, and white gullies. Sometimes you only see where the enemy was after he stops shooting. The campaign teaches patience because rushing through snow usually means bleeding in it. Sometimes you find abandoned gear and footprints leading into weather nobody should trust. Johan treats frost-nipped fingers almost as often as bullet wounds. Eric complains that his rifle hates the cold more than he does. Sergeant Nilsson says rifles have fewer excuses than soldiers, and everyone laughs despite themselves. That laugh matters because Narvik's campaign is becoming a test of who can remain human longest. British troops have been landing since mid-April, while French and Polish formations arrive from late April into May. French Alpine troops and Foreign Legion units soon fight alongside Norwegian forces in the widening campaign. Polish troops also take positions south of Narvik as Allied pressure begins closing from several directions. You never see all those forces assembled in one dramatic parade. Instead, you glimpse foreign helmets, hear unfamiliar languages, and watch supply routes grow more crowded. The combined effort does not erase confusion, but it proves Norway is no longer fighting alone. On May 13, British warships bombard Bjørkvik before French Foreign Legion troops land against German defenders. The landing succeeds, but the bombardment kills Norwegian civilians and destroys much of Bjørkvik. French troops seize Elvegardsmoen and help open the route toward Øyord and the later assault on Narvik. You hear the success beside news of civilian deaths, another reminder that liberation can wound those it intends to save. German control of Narvik starts to look less like destiny and more like a temporary occupation. Allied reinforcements also bring heavier demands for transport, food, ammunition, interpreters, and coordination across difficult terrain. Still, temporary occupations can kill just as completely as permanent ones. During one patrol, your squad watches German positions across a ravine for most of a day. Neither side moves much because movement itself is a target. You study a cluster of dark buildings below and remember that civilians once lived ordinary mornings there. Yet every new ally also means more supply strain, more coordination, and more room for mistakes. War keeps stealing the familiar shape of things, then demanding you attack what remains. At night, the northern sky holds a cold glow that never lets darkness fully settle. The half-light makes every ridge look inhabited and every silence look prepared. You miss full darkness because at least darkness admits what it is. Eric admits he now dreams in snow. Johan says he dreams of dry socks, which makes everyone trust him more. The weeks grind onward until spring light grows stronger and the snow begins loosening along lower slopes. Mud joins ice, making every march uglier without making it easier. Reports suggest Allied pressure is increasing while German strength around Narvik remains strained. Your officers speak more often about coordinated attacks than simple delay. The thought of entering the town fills you with equal parts hunger and dread. You want Narvik back because it is yours, and because loss should not become habit. You begin measuring time less by dates than by weather and the weight of ammunition. By late May, Allied planning centers on a final assault against Narvik from both north and south. British naval guns and French-Norwegian artillery prepare to support crossings and attacks around Rombaken. Your battalion, 2 IR-15, is the only Norwegian battalion assigned directly to the assault on Narvik. Near midnight on May 27, you move toward the Rombaken crossing points with French troops nearby. Artillery opens the attack, turning the pale shoreline into brief flashes of rock, smoke, and snow. Your battalion crosses Rombaken with French forces, while Polish troops pressure German positions from the south. Eric stumbles during the landing, rises swearing, and keeps moving with icy water inside one boot. Johan follows the assault elements, ready for casualties everyone knows may come before the operation ends. Through the pale Arctic early hours, Norwegian and French troops fight toward the heights controlling Narvik's approaches. You fire at confirmed German positions, machine gun bursts, and movement breaking cover against lingering snow. The German defenders resist hard, but weeks of mounting pressure have stripped away the certainty of April 9th. By then, Allied and Norwegian pressure has pushed the German perimeter steadily back toward the town. You are still afraid, yet fear now moves with a plan instead of simple paralysis. On May 28th, Norwegian and Allied forces recapture Narvik after several hours of coordinated fighting. German troops withdraw eastward along the railway toward Bjørnfjell and the Swedish frontier. You enter the town exhausted, soaked, and almost unable to believe the occupation has been broken. The streets, known only from 7 weeks of maps and reports, are scarred and smaller than you imagined, Burned facades and shattered windows line the streets, while the harbor feels wounded rather than dead. No cheering crowd waits on every corner because war has already charged too much for spectacle. But Norwegian flags reappear from hiding places, and faces at windows finally soften. Eric removes his cap for a moment as if greeting a recovered relative. Sergeant Nilsson only says the town is back, so now it must be held. That sentence lands harder than celebration because everyone knows holding is a different battle. Narvik becomes the first city the Allies recapture from the German army in a regular battle. The retreating German force remains dangerous east of town, but the shock of April 9th is gone. You do not phrase it that grandly inside your head. You only know the enemy who arrived like certainty has now been pushed out. That should have been the turning point where the story becomes simple. Instead, Europe keeps moving, and no victory in the north can stop events in France. Only later will you learn Allied commanders had received evacuation orders on May 24 before Narvik was recaptured. By early June, rumors spread that Allied troops may be withdrawn to face the catastrophe farther south. At first, nobody in your squad believes it, because abandoning Narvik feels absurd after such cost. Then supply conversations change, orders become tighter, and optimism begins sounding borrowed. The possibility that success may be temporary wounds morale in a completely different way. You can fight an enemy in front of you more easily than a decision made elsewhere. During the first week of June, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Allied forces are preparing to evacuate northern Norway because the struggle in France has become desperate. The Norwegian government itself was not informed of the Allied evacuation decision until June 1. The news does not erase what was achieved at Narvik, but it hollows the victory. Eric asks whether victory still counts if you cannot hold the ground you won. Sergeant Nilsson answers that some victories count because they prove resistance is possible at all. The victory at Narvik remains real, even while Europe forces the Allies to abandon its strategic benefits. Neither of them sounds satisfied, but both sound honest. The Allied evacuation begins on June 4 under secrecy and growing pressure from the collapse in France. You help cover movements, carry stores, and prepare to leave positions won with blood and exhaustion. Narvik, recaptured on May 28th, cannot be defended indefinitely without wider Allied commitment. On June 7, the King, Crown Prince, and most of the government leave Norway for Britain aboard HMS Devonshire. By June 8th, the last Allied forces leave northern Norway, and the 6th Division begins demobilizing. That evening, German troops move back into Narvik as organized Norwegian resistance begins winding down. A ceasefire begins at midnight between June 9 and 10, followed by Norwegian capitulation on June 10. The campaign ends despite Narvik having been regained because the wider strategic situation has collapsed. You watch equipment being destroyed or abandoned during the hurried demobilization, and it feels painfully close to surrender. Sergeant Nilsson says necessity does not erase defeat, but neither does defeat erase what happened at Narvik. Nilsson's words matter because the landscape around you has been teaching only loss. When you last look toward Narvik, the mountains appear exactly as they did before invasion. The same ridges hold snow. The same fjord cuts inland, and the same light touches the cranes. Only your certainty about the world has changed beyond recognition. You remember waking at Settermoon to news that Narvik had been seized before most soldiers understood the invasion. You remember casualty reports from Eidsvold and Norge arriving through broken communications like blows from another world. You remember Bjørkvik, where an Allied success arrived beside news that Norwegian civilians had been killed. You remember British naval attacks in Ofotfjord, turning German sea power around Narvik into wreckage and stranded crews. You remember climbing ridges with frozen hands and entering Narvik through smoke and damaged streets. And you remember learning that victory can be real even when it is not permanent. History will say the battle for Narvik lasted 62 brutal days at sea. In town and across the mountains, the lesson that victory can be temporary steadies you, because otherwise every sacrifice risks becoming meaningless. It will mention iron ore, destroyers, Allied landings, recapture, evacuation, and occupation. But inside the story, war feels smaller and harsher than strategy. It feels like boots on crusted snow, a map on a kitchen table, and breath steaming over rifle sights. It feels like a sergeant who keeps speaking calmly when no situation deserves calm. It feels like a friend joking badly because silence would surrender too much ground. It feels like a medic carrying bandages through every kind of weather without complaint. And it feels like knowing your country remains yours even while enemies occupy its streets. You began April 9th believing distance and mountains might still keep Norway's war away from your barracks. You leave the campaign understanding that buying time can itself become courage when defeat seems inevitable. Narvik is lost again after being retaken, and Norway will endure years of occupation. What you carried from Narvik was not certainty, but proof that shock had not ended the fight. Yet Narvik also taught you something the first reports of invasion could not. A surprise attack can steal peace, ships, and streets, but it cannot command how long people resist. In the far north, beneath snow and smoke, resistance lasted far longer than the first shock of invasion suggested. And when you finally shoulder your pack and turn away, that is what you carry with you.